So Flutter can deploy to all these different platforms, but that doesn't mean you should treat all those platforms exactly the same. Specifically when it comes to UI, all of them have their own little differences, and they even have some differences on how they act. So you need to make sure you keep those things in mind and develop to that accordingly. So what we're going to cover is mobile versus web UIs. Now there's also desktop, but I'd say desktop is pretty similar to web UI other than like the address bar and back button. Let's go over some of these differences. So the first one is it's obviously a completely different screen. A phone screen's a lot smaller, more vertical, and just like thinner to work with. While a website screen is a lot more horizontal and it's just bigger in general, and there's an address bar and all that stuff. So what does this mean? What does these different screens actually bring you? So the first one, you got to make sure you think about layout. For phone, it could be laid out a couple ways. It could be portrait like this, or it could be rotated, and it could be landscape. While a website can really be any size. You can resize this to be bigger, smaller. Any size works for a website or a desktop application. You also notice since it's more horizontal, you're able to fit more stuff on an actual website. And almost everything is clickable from here, while on a mobile device, there's menus that you need to open in order to access some of these features. The next thing is the way you interact with it is completely different. On a mobile device, you're swiping, you're pressing buttons with your finger, you're pinching and zooming in, doing things like that. While on a website, you're using a mouse and usually clicking, and you have a scroll wheel on the mouse. Maybe you're using a touchpad, but the way you're interacting with it is completely different. One thing specifically to keep in mind on desktop or websites is that you usually have a lot of features that work when you hover over it. So for example, on Twitter, if we hover over the name, you'll see it gets highlighted to let you know that you can click it. There's no way to really hover within an application. So you have to keep those things in mind on how your app works and acts. Next thing is navigation. Usually within a website, all the navigation is just out there and ready for you to use. So we have all these different tabs we can go to here. We have different lists we could go to here. While on a mobile app, you would have to click this in order for it to open up a menu where you can select to go to a different one. Twitter actually has a bottom navigation bar too for some of these like notifications and messages. And then the lists, you can swipe through the lists. And there's also specific features between the platforms. So there is notifications. That's a big one with apps. You have to design the notification, what a push notification looks like. Within the actual app, you should show that there's a notification somewhere. And that's the part of the UI that you got to think about, as well as a feature that you would probably need to add if you're building an application. Another one is you have access to GPS. Now, for Twitter, you might not need this, but depending on what application you use, that might be a really important part. For example, finding your location. If you want to see tweets that are posted that are pretty close to you, you'll need that navigation feature. And in general, there's just different ways to interact with it. On mobile, pinching to zoom is such a common feature. While on the website, you're just scrolling. So you got to make sure those are all handled in each of the situations. Now for the web-specific stuff, we have cookies. Cookies are little bits of data that are stored on your actual browser. So you can keep little pieces of information like maybe what mode, whether it's dark mode or light mode. Now you could do that with local storage on your mobile application, but those are still differences that you got to keep in mind. The next big thing you got to keep in mind is a lot of people use ad blocker on websites. So if your app does have some ads on it, maybe when you pour it over to being a website, that space will be empty. So you need to make sure that UI is consistent with that, and you think about what it would look like if an ad was blocked in that case. Another thing that's web specific is you do have that browser bar. So people can access direct little pages within your Flutter app, and you want to account for that type of stuff. And just note that there's some more UI elements above where you are having your actual website. So like I said, Flutter is great because you can deploy to all these different platforms. But just when you're working with them, remember that each of them have their differences, and you can make sure you account for all of those.